Hello and welcome. In this episode, I'm going to share stories where people believe they encountered a Wendigo. These stories include a young man seeing something straight out of a nightmare while driving to see his friend, and a young couple who had a powerful presence come over them one night while out riding around. But first, we start with a story about a woman who heard what she thought was a cat in need of help, but instead found something sinister when she went outside. Alright, let's get into today's stories. The first story of this episode comes from Indiana, where one user thought they encountered a Wendigo. Their encounter happened at around 10 o'clock at night. There was nothing out of the ordinary until she heard a cat scream outside, which prompted her to turn the porch light on and step out to see what was going on. She expected to have to break up a cat fight, but when she got out there, she could only hear a single cat that sounded like it was in the trees and bushes close to the fence in her yard. Being that she's an animal lover, she felt the urge to find and help the cat. However, as she approached where the cat sounded like it was, its whimpering seemed to get further away and continued to do so the closer she got to the bushes. She thought it was because the cat was trapped and exhausted. In what she calls a foolish action, she mimicked the meows in hopes of coaxing the cat into revealing its whereabouts. It was then that she thought she heard laughter. This caused her to glance in the direction from which it came, and that's when she saw it. An emaciated, shadowy figure that was tall enough it almost looked like a small tree standing there. And she says she gives herself a pat on the back for how she handled the situation upon seeing this creature. Instead of screaming, she slowly backed away through her back door and into her home. However, her encounter didn't end there. After her experience, she began seeing the creature in her dreams. But she does say that she could have been having those dreams due to her still being obsessed with it, but this thing did seem to be in control of her dreams when she dreamt of it. She believes it was just toying with her and may not even be a Wendigo because it didn't try to eat her. This brought her to the internet to share her story because she thought that maybe someone would know what this thing was she had the misfortune of encountering that night. She ends her post by saying she wants to know as much as she can learn about Wendigos. Well, I'm no expert, but then again, who can be when it comes to the unknown? But I can pass along what I've learned about Wendigos from my diving into the cryptid topic. Wendigos are masters at mimicry. They can reproduce just about any sound perfectly, even voices of people you know and are closest to. I've heard many stories where people hear their loved ones crying out for help in the forest. But here's the thing about most of these encounters. The person who the voice they are hearing belongs to is not with them on their trip and is usually very far away from their current location, and sometimes they are even across the country. One story always comes to mind where a young man heard the voice of his grandmother calling out for help, except his grandmother was hundreds of miles away halfway across the country. He knew it couldn't possibly be her. Wendigos employ mimicry to try to lure us into a secluded location alone, usually the woods, in order to isolate us to attack. I've mentioned using the voices of friends and or loved ones, but another favorite of theirs to mimic is a crying baby or a child calling out for help. People also report hearing blood-curdling screams during their encounters. So it would be no problem for one to mimic a cat, especially an injured one like in this story. I should also mention that they like to whistle too, usually a long drawn-out whistle that is repeated the same exact way over and over. Also, something else worth noting is that when you hear these voices and or noises, the closer the sounds are, the further away the Wendigo is, and the farther the sound, the closer they are. So when she heard that cat getting farther and farther away, it was probably actually the Wendigo getting closer to her, and that's when she looked and saw it. As for what she saw, based on the description she gave and the circumstances of the events that took place, and the fact that it appeared in her dreams afterward, it does seem like that she had a Wendigo outside her home trying to lure her into the woods using the sounds of a cat. And she handled the situation perfectly by not panicking and going back inside. Another thing I want to mention is what she describes aligns with what a Wendigo actually looks like. Tall, extremely emaciated, and humanoid with long arms and legs. I know she couldn't see the mouth because it was shrouded in darkness, but a Wendigo's mouth is usually stretched, revealing razor-sharp teeth as well. I've said this in other videos and even have a full video dedicated to correcting the common misconception of what these creatures look like, but Wendigos do not have antlers. The last thing I want to mention is how she saw this thing in her dreams after her encounter, which is a very common occurrence in Wendigo stories. Actually, sometimes Wendigos appear in people's dreams before they even have an encounter with them. It's a tactic they can employ when they choose a target. The poster also mentions that she feels like the Wendigo was in control of her dreams. This is another common thing that happens when people dream about them. What do you think about this story? And what do you think she saw that night? The next story comes to us from a poster who had a terrifying encounter on Christmas way back in 2007. He lived in upstate New York at the time in a rural area. On the night of his incident, he had just gotten through with the fun and festivities of Christmas with his family before leaving to head over to his friend's house that evening. His friend lived on the outskirts of a development that was about a 10-minute drive from the original poster's home. He left his house taking the back roads at approximately 8 o'clock that night. Before getting into his encounter, he gives some information about the area where his friend lives, saying the neighborhood encircled a private lake and was similar to a gated community, according to him. You enter the community through one of 4 entry points, with the roads leading into and around the neighborhood creating a spiral. The homes near the edge of the development were scattered, and as you got closer to the lake, there were more homes that were built closer together. The area where he enters the community and makes his way to his friend's place on the outer edge is surrounded by either dense woods or vast open fields. The homes closer to his friends were not visible from the road as he drove, and he could only see distant porch lights through the trees. He slowed to match the posted speed limit, which was 20 miles an hour, and was unable to speed up much faster than that due to the speed bumps. It was a nice evening, and he remembers cracking the window just a bit to let in some fresh air. He was driving in silence, which he says is rare because he usually has music playing. He figured it was because he was just winding down from his busy day. He then came to a stretch of road with fields on both sides, and both fields backed up to the woods. As he continued driving, he spotted what appeared to be a figure walking on the opposite side of the road heading toward him. So it only took a short while for the perceived person to come into clear view. He managed to catch a glimpse of them through his windshield before they ended up side by side. It definitely was not a person. He describes what he saw as follows. The creature stood tall, walking upright on long legs, had long arms, and looked strong. It was lean and thin, yet muscular, but not in a bulky way. It was at least 7 feet tall and had a light complexion, but he couldn't distinguish if it was white, tan, yellow, or gray. This thing, he says, did not appear to have any fur, and its skin looked textured, and definitely not smooth. It looked to him as if something was hanging from this thing's back, but he couldn't tell what it was. As for the face, he says it had small features, but its mouth and jaw were noticeably large. Also, atop its head, he says were 2 protrusions that rose straight up with something intertwined between them. That's what he could see at a quick glance as he approached this thing in his car. When he pulled up beside wherever this thing was, he turned to look at it outside the driver's side window when it suddenly turned and locked eyes with him. It opened its mouth wide and let out a chilling scream he describes as a high-pitched, shrill shriek mixed with a deep guttural growl. It's something he says he will never forget. He continued driving and says it all happened to him so fast that he didn't have a chance to be afraid, shocked, or have any other similar reaction. He continued past his friend's house and headed straight home. He then called his friend and recounted the incident, explaining his urgent and hasty return to his home. He says he believes his adrenaline was fueling him during his return trip, but shock did settle over him sometime later. He thinks back to that night and wonders what could have happened if his driver's side window had been all the way down. He's certain that something way worse would have transpired that night if it had been. He ends his post by saying he has no idea what that creature could have been and asks anyone who comes across his post if they have ever seen or heard of anything like what he experienced. I may not have seen anything like what he did that night, but I have definitely heard of things like this happening in many stories during my research and delving deep down the cryptid rabbit hole. From the way he described this thing, right down to how big he said the mouth was and how wide it opened it to scream at him, this, at least to me, seems like a Wendigo. The only thing that throws me off a bit here are the protrusions on the top of the head and the thing he saw hanging off this thing's back. I honestly don't know what to make of these two things, and I would need more detail before making my final guess. Being that the encounter happened at night and he only got a quick glance at this thing, it's hard to say for certain what the protrusions on the head or the thing hanging off this thing's back could have been and whether it was part of the creature or not. But the thing that stuck out to me the most about this story was how he described the mouth and jaw of this creature being noticeably large. I mentioned in the first story how Wendigos normally have enlarged and/or stretched mouths, so this definitely fits with that. Also, he describes this thing as being tall and very thin with long arms and legs, and that also fits with a Wendigo. I'm pretty sure if I was him, I would have done the same thing, just kept driving and head for home. He doesn't say how fast he drove home after seeing this thing, but I would have floored it all the way back, especially after it screaming in my face like it did him. What do you think about this one? And how fast would you have driven to get away from this thing? The final story of this episode comes from a poster who shared their encounter that happened in August of 2021 in British Columbia, Canada. He at first believed he saw a skinwalker, but he says he isn't entirely sure that's what it was. Based on what he and his girlfriend experienced, I think it was something else entirely, and being that I included this story in a Wendigo episode, I think you can probably guess what I think they encountered that night. The original poster lives in a relatively small town near Fraser River. His town is located in the midst of an area that is mostly covered in woods. He says there is a large Forest Service road close by that leads a good way into the bush. On the night of his encounter, the original poster and his girlfriend were parked in a gravel lot across from the local high school. It was approximately 11:30 at night. She ended up dozing off due to their busy day being out and about exploring the fair that was in town. Close to 15 minutes after she fell asleep, he had a strange, unsettling feeling come over him. It was the unmistakable feeling of being watched. This provoked in him a nagging feeling that he and his girlfriend had overstayed their welcome. He says here that he always trusts his gut, so he decided to wake up his girlfriend and leave. Just as she was beginning to wake up, he heard a bizarre sound coming from further down the hill in a nearby meadow. It was what sounded like someone yelling, but slightly different, with what he describes as a whoo or ha sound. He says he would have normally dismissed the sound, but it had this eerie echo-like quality to it, as if the person's voice was being manipulated with some sort of audio effect that shifted their voice's pitch. The sound of this strange scream sent a chill down his back because he never heard anything like that before. When his girlfriend was awake, they left, driving to an elementary school parking lot near a hill that led down to a new development in the area. He shared the strange experience with her and they laughed about how eerie it had been. Later, he did some research and found some videos with similar sounds to what he heard. He found some with supposed skinwalker screams and or vocalizations and says they seem to match what he heard that night. When looking at the comments, he learned that the closer the screams sound, the further away the creature actually is. This fact spooked him a bit, but he brushed it off as a mere coincidence. Just to have a little fun, they decided to cruise down the hill to the new development, being that it was dark and eerie with woods on one side of the road where there was a park. The route would take them to a gravel turnaround with a gate at the end, where a gravel path began. As they began descending the hill, a strange and unsettling feeling crept over the OP that felt like a wave of panic, but it faded once they reached the bottom. His girlfriend experienced the same sensation, so they turned around and started to leave. In an effort to change the mood and take the fear away, he blasted some music and hit the gas on their way back up the hill, going fast enough, he says, that it made him feel like nothing could catch them. However, as they neared the top of the hill, the feeling returned in full force. He says the only way he knows how to describe what he felt that night is to say it was sheer terror. Not just fear or dread, but pure terror. Their bodies reacted instantly, with both of them having physical reactions. They had intense chills, with goosebumps covering their entire bodies. Both of them choked up and tears filled their eyes. He even struggled to catch his breath for a minute. As they reached the top of the hill, he accelerated from 60 kilometers an hour to 80, even though the speed limit was only 50. He describes the feeling as being so intense he believes if they had stopped, their lives would have been in mortal danger. It was the most terrifying experience either of them have ever had, despite the fact that they didn't see anything. He mentions here that he has encountered various animals while driving at night, ranging from deer to bears to coyotes. He has even walked home alone at night with a bear rummaging through his neighbor's nearby garbage cans. He has been out dirt biking and passed a bear and her cubs, as well as a moose with her offspring. While he found these experiences to be scary, they were nothing compared to the fear he felt that night. Nothing he has ever been through even comes close in comparison, according to him. After escaping the area, they ended up in a well-lit mall parking lot to calm down, both of them still extremely shaken by the incident. He then took his girlfriend home and then says the drive to his own house was filled with anxiousness and fear, especially since there was a part near his house that had a paved path about 0.4 kilometers long, which ended up at the main road just atop the hill from the development where they had their encounter with whatever was out there. Once he was at home, he made sure to lock everything up tightly, indulged in a certain recreational substance to unwind, and fell asleep in bed while on a video call with his girlfriend. During the night at about 3:30 or 3:45 in the morning, he suddenly awoke feeling a mild resurgence of the panic he felt during his encounter for about 5 minutes before drifting back to sleep. The entire night was consumed by dreams of his unsettling experience. The following morning, his girlfriend says she heard tapping on his window at about 3 in the morning. Keep in mind that they fell asleep while they were still on the video call. The thought made him shudder, given that his window is approximately 9 feet above the ground. He isn't sure what to make of his encounter and posted online to seek guidance about what happened to him and his girlfriend. He says he has always had an eerie sensation when walking alone in the woods close to his home and won't be venturing out there by himself at night anymore. He ends his post by saying that he and his girlfriend decided to return to the scene at night, driving by to see if the strange experience would happen to them again. He says he isn't sure if that's a good idea or not, but his curiosity with cryptids has been piqued and he wants to know what is lurking out there. He closes by saying he would appreciate any insight or help on what this thing may be. I will start off by saying that being in British Columbia, the original poster and his girlfriend very well could have encountered a skinwalker, being that First Nation people are prominent in the province. But they are in an area where Wendigo encounters happen a lot, and something about this one just makes me think it was a Wendigo. That said though, everything they felt could be attributed to a skinwalker as well. Even the following back to his home and tapping on his window. However, what makes me think this was a Wendigo is because of how tall the creature would need to be to reach a window 9 feet off the ground. I'd be interested to know if they were on or near native lands when the encounter took place. When he first described how the screaming sounded, I initially thought that it could have been a Sasquatch, but the feelings he described him and his girlfriend having and the intensity of them is something I don't see in many Sasquatch stories. Plus, he said there was something weird about the scream, like an echo-like quality, and that really makes me think either skinwalker or Wendigo, with my thoughts leaning toward a Wendigo. Going back to the feelings he said they felt while driving, I usually only see people affected by them so strongly in skinwalker and or Wendigo encounters. As I mentioned before, this encounter could be either, and without a physical sighting and or description, it's hard to say, but I just get the feeling that it was a Wendigo. The last thing I want to mention is something I say a lot, and that it's a bad idea for people to return to the scene where they had their encounters. It's bad enough to draw the attention of one of these things, but you don't want to provoke them and make yourself a target by going back out there, especially if it's in their territory. This is true of every type of cryptid, but especially when it comes to skinwalkers and wendigos. They are both said to be vicious hunters who are unrelenting when they set their sights on a target. I just hope he and his girlfriend changed their minds about going back out there and had no further incidents if they did. What do you think they encountered that night? A skinwalker, a wendigo, or something else? And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you'd like to hear more stories like these and other types of cryptids, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to send me your story, I'd love to read it. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. I will also put it in the description below. With your permission, I may want to use it in an episode. Even if you'd prefer that I didn't share your story on my channel and just want someone to listen, email me. We can privately talk about your encounter. And please remember to keep it civil in the comments section. No one deserves to be ridiculed whether they believe or not. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you at the next episode.